Hola. I don't know the Finnish word for hello. Do you remember in previous episodes of the Basstravaganza, I had proposed that we get a number of bass fishermen together and go carve a mountain somewhere into the heads of four great heroes of bass fishing. And unfortunately, due to the fact that Canadians are wimps, basically I haven't had a lot of support for that plan yet. So and we had a little bit of snow here, and I built my own goddamn mountain. So if you look back in my previous episodes, one of the four great heroes, or one of the four great topwater lures that I had proposed was called the Rapala. And I had always, since my days when I was a kid, I had assumed that that lure was named after its inventor, Lauri Rapala. So when I built my mountain yesterday and I was getting ready to film this, I went surfing on the interweb trying to find some pictures of Lauri Rapala, and I found out this crazy little website link, and I learned from that link, according to what it says, Lauri Rapala wasn't really the guy who invented those lures. The inventor was this guy Toivo Pilvalainen, and he invented them, and he carved them out of wood, and they were catching fish. And sort of story was he got to be a local legend maybe, and he refused to sell his lures. People wanted to buy them, so finally he made a deal with Lauri Rapala that he would teach his secrets to Lauri Rapala. And they signed a deal that Lauri Rapala would never sell them and never sell the lures. And Lauri Rapala went on, I'm afraid of saying this because I might get sued. No offense to Lauri Rapala, but Lauri Rapala went on to, apparently that agreement is still in some archive somewhere in some town in Finland. Lauri Rapala went on, he was the one who marketed the lures and went on to sell millions and billions of them. And this Toivo guy went on to, he didn't have much use for that, so he lived apparently on a little island in a lake in Finland, and just spent it. Eventually he got so old that they came and put him in a retirement home in the winters, and he'd go back in the summers, and he was trying to like break out of his retirement home. He staged some escapes apparently, but anyway, apparently he spent his time in this cabin alone on this island a lot of time, and if you went by and wanted to talk to him, he'd tell you just no, go away, I don't want to talk to you. He wasn't much interested in selling his lures or talking to people that came by his island unless you brought a bottle of this. It was Koston Korvos, this Finnish whiskey. So when I read about this yesterday, I immediately had to change my plan. So I changed my plan from Lauri Rapala to Toivo Pilvalainen that I carved in here. I apologize for, we all of a sudden got this warm snap, and this is melting away as I speak. It might not be here by the time I finish my introduction. So I had to do this real fast, and I was not able to locate a bottle of that Koston Korvos anywhere. Yesterday, drove around and around, so I got closest thing, got a bottle of this Finlandia vodka. So going to pour myself a little mug of hot coffee and put in a little shot of Finlandia in honor of my new hero, Toivo Pilvalainen. And maybe we can recapture some of the magic that Toivo put into his lures. Toast to you, Toivo. It's not bad. So it shows how fleeting our lives' endeavors are when trying to make a great work of art and it's melting away. So I'm having to improvise on the fly. You've seen this before. It's called a rapala, and this is my imitation of the classic lure that it came to the North American market in the early 1960s, and it changed my life. Changed my father's life. So we went from the position of being suburban dweebs who never caught any fish when we went fishing to being able to actually catch fish. You can see the idea here. It's got a piece of, he used balsa wood. I've got something actually better. It's made out of super cyper cedar, but same idea. It's very light wood that floats very high in the water. Carve it to make it look like a fish's body. You put a little eye in the front where you can tie a line onto, and a hook somewhere back there or more. And I think he may have used metal, but the idea is you have this curved lip that sticks down. But this lip, it wobbles and it just goes, it actually becomes alive and it darts around. So that was his genius. He invented this lure. And that's why we're going to have another toast to Toivo. Toivo's claim to fame didn't last long, probably not any longer than his likeness here that I've tried to carve in snow. I would have done better, but it's melting faster than I can carve it. So that's about as good as I can do on short notice. You have to remember that as of yesterday afternoon, I was going to do this whole thing with Lori Rapala being the head carved on here and being our hero, and he's no longer one of the four heroes. What I've learned is that it wasn't really Lori Rapala that invented this lure. It was this Toivo guy. He ended up just going and living on this little island in a lake and basically spent the rest of his life inventing fishing lures and not doing a whole lot else. But he did invent one heck of a fishing lure. Of course, now this company, Rapala is the guy, or Rapala, Lori Rapala is the guy who popularized these and trademarked them and copyrighted them and patented them and went on to make a lot of money and start a multinational company. And so they make hundreds of different lures now under the company name of Rapala. But this they call it the original balsa or the original floating minnow, and this is the original lure that began the whole thing. So let's have a toast to Toivo Pilvalainen, the inventor of the Rapala. So now I'm going back to some video I shot 4 years ago. This was back when Lori Rapala was still my hero, before I heard about Toivo.
Documenting my attempts to replicate the work of the great genius Lori Rapala, who invented a fishing lure that still bears his name today. This is a classic store-bought Rapala. These were invented in the 1930s. You can see basic design, a balsa wood body, plastic lip, 3 triple hooks hanging off it. There's a diagram. You can see that it has a piece of stainless steel wire, that's the red, that runs through, and it forms the eyes that those 3 hooks hang off. If you're planning on catch and release, like the Basstravaganza, you want to get rid of those triple hooks. See where this is a store-bought Rapala? I've eliminated the 2 rear triple hooks, and I've replaced the front one with a single barbless hook.
Now I know from long experience that these floating Rapalas are great lures for bass,
But it's the middle of winter, so I have to find something else to fish for. So why not steelhead? And what better place to try than fabulous N2 Lake? Before I spend the hours to make my own imitations, I better find out if they work first. Rapalas are very light lures and they don't cast far. So my plan is to throw it out as far as I can and then sit around like a dummy while the lure drifts down towards the outlet of the lake. I speeded up the film to get past that boring part. Then, just before the lure drifts out of the lake and into the river, I'll start jerking it back underwater, past the same fish it just floated over.
On the Rapala!
It sounded like a good plan when I thought it up, and it works. This is my first ever Rapala metalhead, and it's a good one too.
First fish on the Rapala.
Ornery and mad. I'm racing out to deeper water where there's less chance of having the fish wrap around a boulder or sunken log.
Looks like a good one too.
But that fish wants to stay right where it is.
Come on. Come on back up into the lake. Get your picture taken. You can be the first Basstravaganza Rapala steelhead. What do you think about that?
And another shout out to Toivo, who did the heavy lifting. How many lonely nights did Toivo spend on that island?
A shout out to Lori Rapala, inventor of the Rapala floating balsa wood minnow.
Whittling and sanding and bending tiny bits of metal to get that magic wobble that drives fish crazy.
Oh, that's a big.
I'm gaining ground now, gradually leading the fish away from the shallows. But there are logs floating around on the surface and a lot more lying on the bottom. If that fish wraps around one of them, it will pop that 10-pound line like sewing thread.
Can't put it in that little net. At least maybe I can get a look at him. There he is. Oh, that's okay.
I finally get the fish near the boat where the camera can get a look at it. You can see that big chunk of balsa wood sticking out of the fish's mouth.
Barely flipping his tip up and towing this whole boat in circles. Oh, that's a beauty. Beauty. Oh, that's a steelhead, huh? What are we gonna do with you, buddy?
Well, that wasn't so hard, was it? There's no reason a steelhead should not bite on a Rapala lure. It just never occurred to me to try it before because not many other people use them. Well, I proved that steelhead will bite on a classic floating Rapala lure. Unfortunately, my lure was destroyed in the process. While the fish was head shaking around in the net, the barbless hook got caught in the mesh. And because I'd grindered away the loop where the second triple hook was attached to the store-bought lure, the cut-off end of the wire pulled out of the lure body and the hook slid off the end of the wire. Live and learn. Catching that fish on a Rapala gave me inspiration to make a homemade version and try to duplicate the success of the store-bought lure. If we're going to recreate the greatness of the original floating Rapala lure, we need to start with a piece of wood.
This here board used to grow out of a cedar tree that grew on my property up in Cypress Bay on the west coast of Vancouver Island years ago. I cut that tree down and sawed it into boards and saved this board with me all through the rest of my life. It serves as a shelf most of the time, but every winter I cut a little piece off the end and I use it to make fishing lures. It's already February 2016. I haven't cut my piece off the board yet. I'm going to do that right now.
Lori used balsa wood because it floated the highest. I didn't have any balsa wood handy, but I happen to have something better. Super Cyper Cedar.
This is Super Cyper Cedar. It has special aroma or chemical properties that make fish bite on it.
I mentioned in previous episodes that I sawed this board from a cedar tree I cut down on my own property. I don't know if I ever mentioned that Super Cypress cedar has special chemical properties that make it irresistible to fish.
I might be the last person to ever have a piece of lure making wood made out of Super Cypress cedar from Cypress Bay. Super Cypress cedar. Take a little chip of this, throw it out into the middle of a Walmart parking lot at noon on the hottest day of the year, and you watch a big old bass will come flopping across that parking lot trying to bite on this Super Cypress cedar. It's that good.
Now, if you're not fortunate enough to obtain Super Cypress cedar, you can use ordinary red cedar. You just won't catch as many fish. And it so happened that I was driving past fabulous N2 Lake one day when I noticed this cedar block lying beside the road. It had been flown out by a helicopter as part of a cedar shake salvage business. But it was too short, only 22 inches, so it got left behind. And I thought, how cool would it be to catch a metalhead on a lure whittled from a block of cedar that came from a tree that grew above the lake where I catch the fish? I'll tell you how cool. Way cool. There's no wood on earth that splits as straight and true as old growth red cedar. So here you can see a blank I split off the shake block. Now that I have a piece of wood to work with, I can split off a piece or two to make my lures out of. You can see where I've started to whittle a basic body shape out of the ends of these two splits. If everything works according to plan, one or both of these sticks will catch me a big fish someday. If it's a snowy day and you have time to spare, you can whittle out the basic shape. I can imagine Toivo whittling away those long Norwegian winter nights beside the wood stove in his little cabin. Here I'm roughing out some topwater bass lures. If you have a cup of hot coffee handy, it helps you work faster. I imagine that Toivo was a whittler, but nowadays you can choose life in the fast lane. Fine-grained old-growth red cedar has a musical tone. We used to high-grade our shake blocks and sell them as guitar-making wood. Here I'm shaping the two splits off the shake block into Rapala-making wood. However you choose to do it, you end up with a lure body that matches the shape of the store-bought Rapala. Then sand it down nice and smooth. I start with a coarse grinder bit tacked onto a block of wood and work down to fine sandpaper. A sip of strong coffee makes you work faster. When you get what you want, make sure they match the perfect shape of the store-bought lures, and then saw the lure blanks off the ends of the splits. I love the tinkling sound of old growth cedar. Maybe this lure will make great music someday. Then dip the lure bodies into urethane to seal the raw wood. I'm only going to use one hook, so I don't need the elaborate wire frame that comes with the store-bought lures. Here you can see a stainless steel wire that I bought from Lure Parts Online. I twisted it around to make another looped end. I only need one eye to clip the hook onto and another to tie the line onto, so I bent the wire to that shape and cut a little slot into the front end of the lure with my Dremel grinder. I'll fit that wire into the slot and glue it in forever with epoxy. Now comes the hard part, the part that drives otherwise sane men to become hermits on islands. The diving lip has to be shaped perfectly and attached at a precise spot and angle on the lure body. I spent weeks looking for a clear plastic I could use for a lip before I finally discovered the trays in this storage rack. After I cut out a blank from the tray, I dropped it into boiling water to soften it, and then pressed it around a small spice bottle to get the curved shape. I tried using flat store-bought plastic lips that didn't have this curve, but the lures didn't wobble, they just sheared off to the side. If the lip isn't glued in at the perfect angle, the lure will run off to the side, and you won't catch anything, ever. Now that I've built some lures, it was time to see how they compared to the real thing. This is rare video from my top secret underground lure testing facility that also doubles as my bathtub. You can see that I've taped the top end of a rod to the wall with the line running through it. The lure is tied on one end, and a mesh bag with an onion in it is tied on the other end, looped over the bar that holds the shower curtain. If I let go of the lure, the onion bag falls and pulls the lure along at the exact speed I want. I can adjust the speed by changing the size of the onion. That's called engineering. Here's a store-bought wrap. Notice the quick, perfect, stable, dependable wobble. That's why they make the big bucks. Now watch my pathetic imitations. Some don't wobble at all, some wobble too much, and they all want to pull off to one side or the other. You can spend your life doing this, which is basically what our hero Toivo did with his life. But he had the advantage of being a hermit on an island.
So, previously I documented my efforts to take a piece out of a cedar shake block, and I made it into two homemade Rapellas. And that's these two guys right here. Painted them up. They just looked so killer, and when I got them in the water, they were kind of working in the high-tech, multi-million-dollar lure testing facility here behind me. But boy, when I put them into the lake, they didn't do a thing. They just rolled over on their side.
After weeks of trying and failing, I gave up temporarily and switched to building a jointed lure. I think this was the second big selling lure that Lori Rapala made popular. Here are some pictures that document the evolution of the two imitations I created to match the store-bought jointed lure I was trying to mimic. And here are the first two semi-finished products, flanking the store-bought lure, which has been further modified with my custom fins and tails. Adding all those fins killed the wobbling action, so I had to remove them before I took my lures out for the very first field test at another West Coast Van Isle lake noted for big metalheads. I'll refer to it here as M3 Lake.
Well, finally got my camp set up. It's a little bit late to do any serious fishing, but I got the boat in the water. This lake is so sacred that most of the fishing is so good here that you're not even allowed to say the name of the lake, if you can believe that. That's what they tell me. It was sleeting on the way, on the crest, on the summit on the way over. I drove through sleet. There was snow beside the road, but I made it through and down into the Valhalla Valley of the lake that has no name. I made it into fabulous N3 Lake. Overheated my car, smashed the muffler off the back end, but made it in to this beautiful free campsite. We're going to try fooling big rainbow trout with, this is a store-bought Rapala. This is my homemade imitation. I'm going to try and catch a big rainbow trout on a homemade Rapala. There's some big rainbow trout in this lake. Oh, there's a riser. Look at that. First one of the day. That's the guy I'm after. Sorry, I have to shut this camera down and go catch that fish.
First, I towed a similar store-bought Rapala along shore from the river mouth as a control to compare to my own lure. You can see that I've removed the triple hooks it came with and converted it to single barbless. And you can see my campfire in the background and even maybe the luxurious Volvo Hotel. Well, that store-bought lure was a piece of junk. Try one of my homemade. But the store-bought lure did not get a bite, so I gave up and switched to my own. This is the very first time that lure ever touched the water with the intent of catching a fish. I can't prove that, but it's true. I'm going to start the timer here because this is a scientific test and we need credible data. I don't know if I ever mentioned that Super Cyper Cedar has special chemical properties that make it irresistible to fish. I continued up the shore, trying to get the feel of the lure and the right speed to troll at. And then I made a big loop and cycled right back over the same spot where nothing would bite on the store-bought lure. And it didn't take too long before I had a bite on my lure. 9 minutes and 43 seconds to be exact. So there is scientific proof that Super Cyper Cedar has special chemical properties.
On the homemade Rapala.
What else could explain this?
I got a fish on the homemade Rapala.
Over the fullness of time, I learned that this lure also was a piece of crap. It wouldn't dive deeper than a couple feet, and it would immediately pull off to one side or the other no matter what I did to adjust it, and it almost never caught another fish. But at this time, on this day, it was magic. That's my first ever wild rainbow caught on a lure made of Super Cyper Cedar.
Oh man! On the homemade Rapala. Well, that's not bad.
And funky as it was, it gave me inspiration to spend more hours deep in my secret underground lure design lab,
On the homemade Rapala.
tweaking and fiddling with my original single-piece lures until I finally got a couple that had a fairly dependable wobble.
That was a 5-pounder on the homemade Rapala.
Until I finally got a couple that had a fairly dependable wobble to them.
Let us tip our hats to the great genius Lori Rapala. So I just got back in, rebuilt my campfire. I've spent 2 weeks making this homemade Rapala lure, and I just went out and caught a 5-pound rainbow on it, the first time it ever touched the water. So I am stoked, and I'm going to sit down and have a beer around the campfire. Thanks.
Here you can see 2 store-bought wraps along with their funky homemade doppelgangers made from the shake block I found beside the road. And what better place for a beta version field test than at Fabulous N2 Lake.
Well, I'm back at Fabulous N2 Lake. I'm going to test out my homemade Rapalas again. It's late February. This is the second field test. I've done some modifications. This is the one that I forgot to take out on the lake last time, and it's looking pretty good. So it's never been in the water before fishing, so try that one, a 6-pound test. This is the rod with 10-pound test. I've got that big jointed Rapala that caught the fish at N3 Lake. And it was acting terrible. So what I've done is I took a split shot, and I inserted a split shot into the belly of this, and it's acting way, way better now. So I've got great hopes for this one.
I trolled the jointed wrap, the one that had caught the fish at N3 Lake, all the way down to the lake outlet without getting a bite. It was running deeper now, too deep to work across the shallows near the tail out, so I switched to the classic single-piece lure. Sometimes there are fish here and sometimes not, and today I could see fish moving. They were here, but would they bite on my goofy lure? With 6-pound line, I could actually cast this lure out far enough to maybe catch a fish. I motored across to the opposite shore and cast back across the feeble current exiting the lake. You can see the lure wobble like a live minnow. This was Toivo's secret, and Lori Rapala's too. Even if their first lures were funky, They acted like live fish. And so does mine. This lure has mojo.
It's looking pretty good, so it's never been in the water before.
And it didn't take long before my homemade wrap got their attention. Here's another tip from Humpty.
Humpty's tip of the day.
If you feel a little tap on your line and then you see a big slow bulge on the surface behind your lure, there's probably a big metalhead around.
Humpty's tip of the day.
Howdy doody. What have we got here? That fish is toying with my lure and toying with my emotions. I spent all winter working towards this one moment and I'm coming ever so close. But the fish turns and flips me the bird. Then it heads back to tell its cohorts the news. It's really funky with a crappy paint job. So you know I was going to throw right back into that same spot, and you can guess what was going to happen next. Quick as snap, and the magic lure I had spent so long fabricating is gone, gone, gone. At first I thought I'd broken off my 6-pound line, and you can hear me grumping about that, but a closer inspection proved that my knot had failed. To fish these lures effectively, they need a special knot called a Rapala knot.
Months worth of work on that lure, and I broke it off minutes after it first hit the water.
And this is the first time I ever had that knot fail. But I've got one more bullet in my gun. So I tie the other single piece lure onto the rod with the 10-pound line and throw it across the channel. Then I see a fish swirl in the same area my lure is drifting into. This is getting exciting. Time to flip the adrenaline switch. This lure is even more crude than the last one, but that fish didn't care. And this time my Rapala knot holds up. I flip on the electric motor and try to zip out to deeper water, but that fish has other ideas, and it spits the lure out while I'm crashing into the bushes along shore. The perils of single barbless. Still, it's a moral victory for me. At least I know they'll bite on that skinny lure. So after one more slug of hot vitamin C, I throw the homemade wrap out again, and this time I let it float all the way down to the very lip at the outlet of the lake. After a few tense minutes of anticipation, I begin my retrieve. Bingo! There's another one. And this time I managed to clear the bushes and get the fish headed in the right direction. I'm foolishly hoping that it might be the same fish that just took off with my last lure.
What do you think about that?
And it might be. But if so, there's little chance that that barbless hook is still in the fish's mouth.
Maybe I'll get my lure back. Maybe it's the same one that took off with my lure.
I keep letting out line as I motor out into deeper water away from the snags along shore.
On the homemade wrap. I see I've got some battery left. I hope there's enough battery to get a look at this fish. Coming in now. But he might not hang around the boat very long. What have we got here? There's something on the end of my line. Something. Oh, that's a big one. Oh yeah. That's a big fish. Holy smoke. That's a nice one. As the great American philosopher Jed Clampett used to say, "Wee doggies!" Eat your heart out, Lori Rapala.
This fish is long and lean like a piece of steel pipe with a head and a tail. I miss on the first pass by the net, so I have to bring it around again. Another ironhead in the bag, and my first ever on a homemade lure. You can see it through the mesh of the net. Mission accomplished, and a shout out to you, Toivo.
On the homemade wrap.
Your genius idea has fooled hundreds of millions of fish, and it just fooled another. And back into the lake with you, pal. I had my moment of glory, so I'm calling it a day. But you have a hot girlfriend waiting for you back at that tail out.
Well, that concludes my tribute to Toivo. His legend is melting away almost as fast as his mountain already did. But his name will be carved forever, high up onto Mount Fishmore. And let's not be too hard on Lori Rapala. He had a family to feed, which Toivo did not. So let's not be too hard on him for mass producing and marketing these incredible lures to millions of useless dweebs like you and me. And let's also not forget that Lori had a second job during those difficult years when he was starting up his company. Both the Russians and the Nazis invaded Finland, and he won medals for fighting against those invaders. And at the same time he was inventing these lures, he used them to feed his friends and family while they were under foreign occupation. So it kind of puts the concept of the weekend warrior into perspective. Next we're going to go invade another watershed ourselves on the Basstravaganza, a place that was ravaged from a fish's point of view. It was ravaged every bit as much as Finland or the other countries in Europe were during the Nazi occupation. But in this case, it wasn't Nazis that did the bad work, it was loggers.